We started investing in the space in 2017. So that was before Cannabis 1.0, which was Canadian cultivation. Gauge is really good genetics. And I think, like as the consumer gets more educated, you're going to have a market for that. Like we talked to doctors about this, and they like back when we started CB1, we went to the pharma analysts. I think it was at Cowan, and made this whole case about the endocannabinoids. They laughed us out of the room. I mean, literally laughed in our faces. And like 3 years later, they wrote a 100-page white paper on the exact same issue. I was going to say, depending on who you ask, there's going to be wholesale change coming from above, from the federal level.
Hi, my name is Jason Raznick, the CEO of Benzinga, and welcome to the Raz Report. As always, before we kick things off, I want to quickly tell you about what Benzinga is. Before I started Benzinga in 2010, there were very few places to get real-time information on financial markets. I thought it was unfair that Wall Street had access to this information before the average Joe investor. So I created Benzinga to level the playing field for you, the retail investor. Benzinga is for the people and by the people. Now, let's dive into the show. All right, welcome to this edition of the Raz Report. Very excited to have this guest on. I wanted him on for a long time. He's an entrepreneur, a financier, investor, hedge fund manager, writer, most read guy on Wall Street back in the day, no doubt about it. It is Todd Harrison from CB1 Capital Management. Welcome, Todd, to the Raz Report.
Hey, Jason, it's good to see you again, my man.
All right. Hopefully you can hear me, but excited to have you on because you have had multiple careers in your short time in industry. And when you have these careers, you don't do it small. Like one thing I've learned about you is that you always attracted attention, not because you were looking for attention. It's because you deliver quality products and quality information. That's never changed. So I used to read Todd Harrison on Minionville, and I don't even know how to say it, his prose, his prose, or his commentary, what he wrote was just above what anything else you see out there. It's the honest truth. And now, like, there's a new thing he's doing, toddharrison.substack.com. We're going to get into the cannabis space. But Todd, what brought you in to the cannabis space?
I don't know if I've ever really been out of the cannabis space as long as I can remember, but what really got me focused on cannabis was coming out of 9/11. As you know, I was president of Kramer Berkowitz, which was Jim Cramer's hedge fund down on 40 Fulton Street when the planes hit. So saw a lot of unfortunate things. I didn't realize the impact that had on me for a bit, but had the good fortune to go see a woman by the name of Dr. Julie Holland, who remains one of the foremost leading experts in the space. And she opened my eyes to the science, to the history, really made me rethink how I looked at the plant and really looked at it through more of a lens of wellness as opposed to vice. And started that track down towards CB1. So it's been about 15 years that we've been studying the plant. We hung a shingle at CB1, I think, in 2017. So we have a fund. We invest in the space. We do some advisory work. We do some advocacy work. Interesting times.
We're going to get to all that, but I want to take it back. You said you went and met this doctor, and the doctor mentioned about cannabis, the plant. Was it like a therapist? I'm asking because I think like Howard Stern, the guy has probably a few $100 million. He goes to therapy 2 to 3 times a week. I think in America, there's a stigma on getting help from other people and talking about mental health. And I have no idea if this person was that at all, but I'm just asking in case it was, so other people can see that someone that's as successful as you, like, sought help. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no shame in talking about it. I mean, I had PTSD. I didn't know what that was. I knew I was very depressed. I knew I was very forlorn. I shut myself down from the world. I had very bad thoughts for a long time. She was a pharmacologist, and she's somebody who I started seeing because I realized I needed help, thankfully. And I, she's on our board of advisors now at CB1. She remains a colleague to this day. But yes, to your point, I've had, mental illness in my family. My father suffered, may he rest in peace. He passed away last year. He was bipolar. And I think it's one of the most misunderstood diseases in society. So yes, you're not going to get any sweeping under the rug there. But cannabis, I think is part of the solution, is where we net it out. And it was, for my PTSD, and then my partner, who became my partner, this gentleman who I met, solved for a seizure disorder using cannabinoids. And we started to look at this and say, wow, there's all these different indications and there's all these different wellness attributes. And we really dove deep into it and surrounded ourselves with people who we thought were pretty educated in a world where it's illegal to be educated, or it was anyway illegal, or very difficult to get educated or do any sort of research. So it's been a bit of a longer road than we thought, Jason, and it continues to continue.
Well, and we're going to go into your investing and what you do, your newsletter, and what you're doing on the charity aspect, because he's involved with another mission. But back in the day, it was the Ruby Peck Foundation. I met Todd at one of his gatherings, named after his grandfather, I believe. And by the way, Todd, this is not me Googling. This is straight memory. But one thing I need to go back to, I don't know if I knew that about you, maybe where, the mental health stuff, but anyone listening, we all, and I mean every single person, all have mental health stuff that we need help with, be it taking medicine, be it talking about cannabis. And we're going to get into that because I go through it. I get really stressed in the mornings when I have to get up in the morning. I get, anxious about certain things. And Todd just talked about it, and I just think that's awesome. So continue to tune in the Raznick. So we're going to talk more later about that and like how cannabis has impacted him and impacted others, I think. But before we do, I just like your Cannabis Confidential Substack newsletter. I know I'm jumping around, but I have to say, like, you started it recently. I have two questions: what made you start it, and is it like a true passion you have?
Well, education's always been a passion. I do think that there are cannabinoids that can help with ADD. Jason, if we could talk about that after, we could jump around together. But
Please
I've
do.
always liked to write. I started writing when Jim Cramer asked me to fill in for him in July of 2000 when he went to the Hamptons, and I had never written before, and I just took a stab and enjoyed it, pop culture and the other sort of creative ways to maybe let some steam out, but it also allowed me to synthesize what was going on. And I started a Substack a couple of years ago. I did it maybe once a month, as the case may be, every couple of weeks anyway. But I told myself that once I got to 5,000 subscribers, I would try to monetize it. And it just so happened that happened at June 26th. So right in the midst of a 900 some odd day bear market in cannabis, into the summer, into right when safe banking failed to move through the Senate before the summer session. So I talk about launching something into the depths of despair, right? And it's either genius or it's madness, but we'll see. So write a daily recap, talk about what's going on. There's a wellness bent, but there's also, we're here looking to try to make money as well as this market comes online and fights through the many different artificial and real impediments that it faces from here to normalcy. But it talks about that. So, I enjoy it. I pick at it all day when I have time. And then sometime after the close, I put it out there and it just sort of recaps what's going on and things to pay attention to because, what was it, 925 days ago, there was a lot of excitement about this sector. And if I told you then that you could buy this 90% off with New York and New Jersey and Maryland and Missouri and Connecticut and all these other states de-risking the longer term thesis and perhaps never being closer to federal incremental reform, you'd probably be excited. But I think right now people are just so defeated, and I get it. But I don't think that the opportunity has changed. I just think that the market and the timing and the conditions have changed. So we talked.
Yeah, and we're gonna go to that in one question about that's a freaking great point. 900 days, and now you have all these other states opened up, and yeah. But before we go to that, how when you write this letter, you have a passion for writing. My question to you is, do you not? When you I have to write a piece, is it every day you're like, oh, I got to write another piece, or do you look forward to writing your piece and getting your opinion out there?
Depends. I think is the honest answer. There are some times that you don't really feel like sharing, but it's not. People think that I'm on Twitter all day. I'll tell you a little secret. Like I collect these headlines and such, and I usually populate Twitter by 9:30 in the morning. So I'm done with Twitter. We'll post something every half hour as the case would be. And if something breaks, I'll throw it on there. But it's gotten pretty venomous and toxic and not the best use of energy for me. So I spend more time on, there's a smaller group of Twitter subs for the that I talk about, the market and the flow and what we're doing and what we're seeing. And people who are interested in that, are welcome. But there's no acrimony, there's no assholes, there's no time for that.
No,
Substack
I love it.
really is an amalgamation of that. So as I'm sort of populating Twitter, I'm also populating the column for the day. And then as the day evolves and the themes start to stand out, then the last thing I'll do is pick a title and sort of write the recap around what happened. But by the end of the day, it's usually pretty done by hook or by crook. So it's not as big of a time suck. I've been doing this writing while trading, trading while writing, multitasking for 23 years now. So it would almost feel odd if I didn't do it.
Interesting. Okay. So now let's go to your hedge fund experience in the stock market and cannabis. So you mentioned 900 days ago, everyone's excited about cannabis. Right now, maybe they're not. Maybe the market's not into it. Even though some companies are reporting profits, I think TerraSen, run by Jason Weil, just had a good quarter. And you do a lot of work with several other cannabis companies. What's your take on the cannabis investing space? And if you can't talk about certain ones, I understand, but love to hear from an expert. Again, Todd Harrison, guys, like made money in bear markets, bullish markets. I can't show you his resume, or I can't show you his P&Ls from back in the day. I guess we probably could if we really went back and did all that stuff, but the budget we have here at Benzinga won't allow for that. But just trust me to say the guy knows what he's talking about. If you're meeting Todd for the first time, I don't say that about many people. You can watch my interviews. I have not really said that. This guy is the guy. And so, Todd, just jump in and take it. Like the 900-day point you make is really, really a good point.
I mean, listen, this has been these last. I mean, remember we opened this. We started investing in the space in 2017, so that was before the Cannabis 1.0, which was Canadian cultivation, and that boom and bust, and then Cannabis 2.0, which is CPG, U.S. led CPG, and that had its run, into the election of 2020. And the blue wave, if you remember that. And then it all started to fall apart. And I think it was February 10th of 2021 was that sort of exhaustion top. And it hasn't looked back since. And there's a lot of reasons for that, from the deflation in the underlying price of cannabis, because remember during the pandemic, everyone was sitting at home growing cannabis, for lack of a better analogy, and there was just so much supply. And of course, when you have a lot of supply, prices crash, and that a lot of people made money during the pandemic and through the pandemic. And I think at the same time, the states took their foot off the gas or some states, I should say, in terms of what is a viable framework for a legal state level market. And I look at New York when I say that, and they said, okay, we got all this COVID cash flushing through our budgets. We can do something really unique and reward all of these, former convicts and et cetera, et cetera. But it's very difficult, if not impossible, to legislate wealth, as New York is finding out the hard way right now. So those have been missteps. And I think the federal government had opportunities to pass safe banking a couple of years ago, which is 5-6% right off the top of a difference, if you want to quantify it. And then, we use the analogy all the time that it's easy to hold your breath for a minute under 10 feet of water, but almost impossible to hold your breath for 10 minutes under a foot of water. And, it's been, as I said, 925 days. So what's happening, is you've got a war of attrition now, and a lot of these social justice programs couldn't get off the ground. A lot of these smaller companies don't have what it takes to get through this because of the tax structure. 280E is a 70% effective tax rate. There's no credit cards, there's no banking. They've done everything they can to try to hold this industry down. So you've seen, year over year, we were talking about this earlier today, some of these companies flat growth, and you're like, okay. But if you look closer, you have unit volume that continues to get better, but you have price deflation, which is crunch margins. At the same time, you've got inflation in everything around us except for your product, which is deflating. So it's been sort of the worst of all worlds for cannabis companies over the last couple of years. And there's been, I think, a fairly healthy debate about, is cannabis even a growth sector anymore? I wrote about this, I think, yesterday or 2 days ago, because you look at year over year and you sort of look at what these companies have to do. But, when you have a status quo where you can't deduct ordinary operating expenses and you can't get access to capital and you're basically in survival mode, you do what it takes to survive. And if that means cutting CapEx, if that means not investing in your future as much just so you can get to the other side of the industry, then so be it, because there's going to be a lot fewer people that are there when you get to the other side. So these politicians, the Cory Bookers of the world, I will lay myself down, like they've created the very oligopoly that they tried so hard to avoid by doing this. Because the Veranos of the world, the Green Thumbs, the Terrasens, some others, Glass House is crushing in California. Like there's companies that are going to find their way through this, but if they don't democratize the environment, and there's ways that they can, and we'll get to that, it's going to, they're going to continue to fortify, iron sharpens iron. You're going to have a handful of companies, this FANG, that is fortified, it is forged out of the many pets.coms and the many web vans that went into the Y2K bubble, if you want to look at that analogy.
Okay, no, that is great. And we're going to get more into the micro, the ways that they can democratize things and figure out how to make this industry right. And we're also going to talk about, Weldon, Mission Greens, things like that. But before we do, I just read your blog post on, a state that's close to me, Sparta Rules. It was Michigan. You said Michigan's a top market. I don't know if I'm giving too much information, but Todd has some family that went to University of Michigan, some family that went to Ohio State. Ew.
I almost wore my Ohio State shirt for you today, but I didn't want to do that.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, it actually, it's so weird. It kind of hurts like when I see it. And I have to be honest, Todd, up until the last 2 years, it hasn't been a rival. Ohio State's killed Michigan, but now at least it's something. Okay, so Todd wrote a blog post about Sparta. So Michigan, what are they saying? The top market right now or something?
Yeah, per capita, it's number one right now, and it's surprising. Michigan's a very saturated state, but you talked about Jason Wild earlier in Terrasend and how deep they've gone there. There's a handful of states you can sort of go that deep from a dispensary footprint, and they caught a lot of shit for going into Michigan and paying what they paid, which was part timing. But as I always tell the team there, Jason, Z, Keith, like I don't look at Michigan as a silo for them. I look at the Gage brand as a dividend that's going to continue to pay across New Jersey and Maryland and Pennsylvania and the rest of their footprint. Gage is really good genetics. And I think, like as the consumer gets more educated, you're going to have a market for that. In any market, you talk about the 1%, there's a 1% in cannabis too. Like I do the channel checks in New Jersey because New York sucks cannabis wise. And I talked to the bud tenders, and they can't keep Gage on the shelves. They say somebody had said to me there that they thought that Cookies was like a 37-year-old LeBron, but that Gage, or I think they might have even said Kind Tree, was like a 19-year-old LeBron. And I thought that was interesting because the consumer is getting smarter. But ultimately, the genetics and the ability to grow really good cannabis, and I think of Glass House, I think of Forefront, and their Mission dispensaries. I mean, this is at the end of the day what we're doing. If you can do that at scale, at a low cost, and do it, better than others, you're going to win. And we are now in that process of weeding out, the winners from the sinners. And like I said, there was real hope that we could have seen some progress by the summer with regard to safe banking. I thought the Silicon Valley bank crisis in the spring probably cost us that victory. It pushed everything by a month. But we'll see what happens in a couple of weeks when they come back from their summer vacation, and we'll see if SAFE can get through the banking committee and then through the Senate, and then ultimately we also have the HHS and the DOJ and their scheduling review, which could solve for 280E and taxes. So there are some lights at the end of the tunnel that may not be affixed to the front of the train, but after this long, I don't think many people are giving the benefit of the doubt to our legislators and politicians anymore.
I hear you. It's funny though. Your one answer here gives me like 10 other questions, and I know we only have limited time. But you just mentioned Gage genetics, and it's going off the shelf, and people love it. How do you? So I went to a cannabis store with Todd, and he showed me around, and we had a person helping us. Yeah, it's Verano, exactly. Yeah. And I, learned a little bit, but like, how does the word of mouth of Gage's genetics get out there? Is there like, how do the bud tenders find out? Is it literally just like word of mouth? Just like if you're in the golf industry, people know that the new TaylorMade and the new Callaway are the drivers. Like, is that how it works?
I mean, I think it's word of mouth right now because there's no standard for advertising. Listen, when I go to Massachusetts, it's like everybody I talk to, I'm like, where do you go for your cannabis? And they're like, yeah, we go to Mission. Like, well, it's twice as far as the next will go because it's that good. And I remember when they rolled over their genetics at NECC in Connecticut and Massachusetts like a couple of years ago. And, it's just that's the difference maker. Now, of course, there is the conversation that ultimately cannabis as an ingredient, right? Because you'll drink it, you'll rub it on, you'll take it in tincture form. I mean, my wife
Yep.
she doesn't like to smoke, but she went through neck surgery, and she used the bombs. I mean, she lives on them
Yep.
because it's the only thing that helps with her nerve pain. So there's a lot of use cases, and it's not going to be about who can grow the best cannabis. I think ultimately it's going to be very much about CPG and brands, but also about use cases and functionality of those particular cannabinoids and tailoring that to a patient. And 3.0, I'm talking cannabis as medicine. So like we're in a learning curve right now, but until the U.S. government gets out of the way, we're sort of stuck in the past here.
All right. I had these organized questions here, but now I'm just throwing them away because I wasn't going to go here, but just what you said really just hit me because I remember now something you said or something you wrote, and I read it 3 years ago, and you said it, and I like repeat it, like trying to paraphrase you, but I do a terrible job. So this is what we're gonna go to. You just mentioned about the rubs, the tinctures. My mom and dad were in a hotel room 4 years ago. They smelled it said it smelled like skunks next to them. And then the hotel room next door. So they called security. They thought there was like a skunk in the room next door. They didn't know it was cannabis. Okay. That's how like ignorant or what have you. My mom now swears by it's called extreme. It's I have the same bottle. I use it when my shoulder hurts on golf. She uses it for her back. She did everything you could imagine, Todd, for her back. This extreme, whatever it's called, it's a rub. It's I don't know what exactly the term is. She swears by it. It's saved her back. It's one of these things that's been unbelievable to her. The reason where this is coming together is that many years ago, well, not, you talked about this, that in the 1950s, or I don't know what years, the 40s, you one time talked about how cannabis or hemp was legal, and then pharmaceuticals got involved, and then it became illegal. You were like the one person that like told this story in a succinct manner, and I like, resonated with me. But do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it was when they repealed prohibition, and it's funny also. You could talk about the rhyme between the socioeconomic landscape when prohibition was repealed and the socioeconomic landscape today. And I wrote this tweet in 2012 that the first depression caused the end of prohibition. The next depression will cause the modern prohibition of cannabis to end. I wrote that 11 years ago. And I still believe it, still waiting for it. But yes, this is all very pernicious. The U.S. government wanted to stop the migration of Mexican immigrants through El Paso. And so how they did that was they went to ban marijuana, which the AMA at the time, cannabis was being used for fussy
AMA,
babies,
American Medical
menstrual
Association.
cramps. What's that?
AMA stands for American Medical
Yes,
Association.
yes, sir.
Okay.
So this was in society. I mean, it was pretty, you hear about like, um, just how versatile it was through society, but they didn't know, the AMA and the doctors didn't know that cannabis was marijuana. So they outlawed marijuana. And the AMA was like, wait, what the fuck? Like, and it was too late. And they tried to change it, but it was too late. This is all part of the American Register. This is all history. And they've kept it there, and they've made it very difficult to unwind by design. And Nixon, if you go and look at Nixon cannabis tapes, he's recorded. They show him that it has efficacy. I think it was for epilepsy and for cancer potentially. After they
Okay.
studied it, and he said, ignore it. These are the Jews. He blamed the Jews. He said, these are the Jews trying to do their thing, or whatever it was. It's all on tape. And, it remains Schedule One. I mean, this is one of the great, I used to think growing up that propaganda was a Russian thing, right? This is your brain on drugs and reefer madness, but the US is just as bad, right? Mind control. This is something that's actually beneficial. It's the only, drug where people take it for the side effects. Really, I mean, there's so much efficacy and so much genuine wellness, in this plant, and we haven't uncovered it. There's so much more we need to learn, but until it gets all Schedule One, it's going to be a real bear to study it, at least in the U.S.
Wow. And so if that didn't happen, or if like cannabis never got looked at that way, do you think this day and age, like Ambien, Xanax would not be a thing, and there would be different cannabinoids of like, here's your thing for anxiety, here's your thing for sleep,
Yeah,
here's your thing for ADD.
ultimately, I mean, and this was, we left out the part of the story where like the robber barons of the time, like the Hearsts and the paper empires, they, because the hemp was such a versatile crop. Hemp, really could damage so many different industries if it was adopted. And so all of this, follow the money, goes back through history before there was these were recorded on cell phones. I mean, all of this stuff has sort of been driven by greed and money and racism, really. I mean, because they weaponize this plant to stop a certain type of people from entering this country. And I think people are getting smarter demographically. I remember I went on Yahoo Finance, or what was it, before that was before CNBC, like 12, 13 years ago, talked about this as my single best idea for the next decade. And they looked at me like I had four heads, and I was trying to explain them like, this is, everybody who's opposed to it, not everybody, but the majority, they're going to age out over the course of the next 10, 15 years. And sure enough, that's what we're seeing now. You look at these polls, they come out every day. We talk about them on Cannabis Confidential. I mean, the number of people who have tried cannabis, the number of people who actively use cannabis, the tax revenues from cannabis, is as much as alcohol and cigarettes in Colorado now. So it's like, follow the money, right? And that's why right now this is at such a frustrating place, right? Because you have stakeholders from sitting all around the table, all of whom have a legitimate claim on this plant, right? You have the legacy guys, you have the operators who have followed the rules, you have the criminal justice advocates, you have the social justice advocates, you have, I guess, corporate America, and everybody wants their piece of this, and everyone's sort of pulling on this baby. But keep pulling on the baby, as I like to say, you're going to pull the baby apart. And I get frustrated because the industry, the cannabis industry, the operators we work with, we're investing in, there's a bunch of them, but we should be able to stand together as an industry and say, this is what we need as the next step. We want safe banking as the incremental next step. And from there, we'll take Schedule 3 because that's what's politically feasible right now. It's not where we want to go, not where we need to go. People shouldn't be in prison for a plant. I think, but it's not going to happen in one fell swoop. It's a multi-step process. Whereas the alcohol industry, if they want to kill banking as they did in December, they need one step, and that's just to get into Mitch McConnell's ear or whoever it is who could put the kibosh on this. And that's what we've seen over and over again. So the industry needs to come together. I'm hoping that we'll see that in September, October. But people are scared right now, and when you're scared, you tend to do things that you may not otherwise do.
All right, we're going to get into about the industry coming together in 1 second. But before that, I know you briefly touched on it, but you're from there, or you live there. Why has New York in particularly been so disappointing? I have my opinion on it, but what's your opinion?
I think they went to war with the ROs or the MSOs. They tried to make a statement that, we're not going to let big business take over New York cannabis. But the MSOs aren't big business. Like, they're the entrepreneurs and pioneers, in my view, who've done it better than others to get to this point. We used to celebrate those type of people in America, not disparage them. I think of big cannabis. I looked at Anheuser-Busch or Philip Morris, and I'm like, yeah, that's probably where it ends up going, and probably not the best. But like, to get from here to there, at least maybe we'll get rewarded by the Jason Wilds or the George Arcos or the Green Thumbs or whoever it is, right? Like, there's some really good companies, good operators out there trying to do the right thing. New York basically said, I told you, they had the COVID cash come in, and they said, okay, let's, I don't want to say create the most woke program ever, but that's sort of what they set out to do. And listen, I think there's a big difference between criminal justice and social justice. I don't think people should be in prison for a plant, but I don't necessarily think those same people should be at the front of the line for a metropolis like New York, when you have companies that have been spending years and hundreds of millions of dollars building toward that day so they can get safe, regulated products at scale to the marketplace, employ people, generate tax revenue. Missouri did it, Maryland did it, leverage the existing medical framework and go from there. New York tried to do the opposite. And they might have to tilt and start over, which is not going to be good for anybody. But what they've built is not sustainable to scale on. So I don't see how they don't have to do that.
And the thing that all this illegal cannabis that's being sold at every store in New York. Bruce Linton was on the show and he said, "Can you buy moonshine anywhere?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Eventually, the government's going to stop the legal cannabis because they make tax dollars on it." I don't know if that's going to happen, Todd, but that's what he said. Because like if you go to a regular store, they sell cannabis and they're not supposed to, but they somehow get away with it
Well,
there.
most New Yorkers think that's the legal framework because it's on every corner. And Jeff Schultz will tell you because he was very active in, as were we, in trying to impress this upon the New York regulators. But go after the landlords, find them every day that they're selling cannabis, and watch how quickly those shut down. Like the optics of going after the operators are terrible anyway. You go after the certificate of occupancy. You find them
That's a
every
great
day,
idea.
and it's about the money at the end of the day. Because if you take the stash, there's going to be more behind it. But yes, it's going to change.
So why don't they do that? Jeff Schultz, a fellow Michigan, a year young, 2 years younger than me, from the same community. That's a great idea. Go after the landlords, Todd. Why
Well,
don't they
they
do that?
started. They just, I mean, last week maybe, but they just started.
Oh, okay, making progress. All right,
Yeah.
so you did. One more until we get to Michigan Green, but you just mentioned cannabinoids for ADD. Not just ADD, but I mentioned anxiety. Are there, like, if you said, "Hey Jay, Gage has this brand that'll help focus you," and like, are the products created that way yet? Like, could you say, Jason, go buy this and it'll help you with your ADD?
There's generalities where that falls flat. Is that we're all different. Our physiologies are all unique. So what may work for you won't necessarily work for me. And cannabinoids are, there's, I don't know, call it 150 to 200. Nobody knows because this system was the endocannabinoid system was first discovered in the early 90s. Like I would graduate in Syracuse, like they just found this, so it was never taught. We're not. It was just recently began being taught in medical schools. Like we talked to doctors about this, and they like back when we started CB1, we went to the pharma analysts. I think it was at Cowan, and we made this whole case about the endocannabinoid. They laughed us out of the room. I mean, literally laughed in our faces. And like 3 years later, they wrote a 100-page white paper on the exact same thing. And it wasn't, there was
Really?
no animosity. They just, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't learn. And this
Yep.
is, this is a pretty significant thing. It's the most ubiquitous network of receptors in the human body. It helps to regulate neurotransmissions. Big deal. Everything that's on the market right now either clamps down on neurotransmissions or it speeds them up. Nothing regulates them. Nothing helps, as my partner likes to say, that skipping record from getting back on track.
Okay.
And that's the magic of the endocannabinoid system. So to your point, I can't say to you, you should like this any more than I could say to you, like if you walk into a bar and I say pick an alcohol and you pick the Campari and you're like, oh, I don't like alcohol. I'm like, no, you don't like Campari, right? But there's other things that might suit you better. And it's a similar analogy, but I do think that when we get to the place from a technology standpoint, that by the time, God willing, our children are our age, you're going to be able to go somewhere and get a custom suite of cannabinoids that are specifically suited to your endocannabinoid system. So it's going to be almost like a tailored vitamin for your system. Where are you deficient? And this is why when you're kids, it's not so good because you're still developing. As you get older and your endocannabinoid, I don't say starts to fade, but the cannabinoids in cannabis can help your body through these natural processes by supplementing those cannabinoids. And we're just scratching the surface of what we understand, but we do know that of all the cannabinoids, only about 10% will get you high, but they're all therapeutic. CBD, right, is an antipsychotic. People take it to sleep, but what it really is doing is they're not being so obsessive so they can relax and then fall asleep, whereas CBN does not get you high, but is specifically suited to help you sleep. No hangover. You talked about Ambien earlier. This is a category killer, and you wonder why Big Pharma has been. This is
Well,
money.
Todd, I have Ambien. I don't take it all the time, but I do take it sometimes, and maybe I need to take something else that's
Try
cannabis related.
CBN. I mean, you're in Michigan. You're very lucky, right? I mean, because I can't get CBN where I am. I mean, I can go to Jersey and smuggle it home.
So
But
CBN, it's called.
CBN, yeah.
I'm writing it
And I
down.
mean, it's
Okay.
great. I mean, GTI is snoozeberries, but
I'll,
there's
I'll,
other.
I'll buy I'll buy it for you. I don't know if I'm allowed to send it, but somehow
No,
I'll get
no,
it to
it's
you.
okay. I'll see you soon anyway, right? We're gonna see each
Nope.
other
If
soon.
you can't get it in Jersey, yeah, yeah. Todd will be at the Benzinga Cannabis Capital Conference. He'll host a private dinner. Also, Todd has again the Cannabis Confidential Substack. You can see it at toddharrison.substack.com. I'm telling you, if you want to be in the know on this industry, and people want to be in the know in the industry when they start after it's too late. What Todd does is he gets early and he gets deep. So we talked a little bit about some cannabis companies. We said Terracen, Verano, any like other public ones or any public ones you think people should look at from a long-term investment standpoint, or if you don't want to get into names, I don't know. Is there an
Well,
index or an
I mean,
ETF that
rather
you
than
like?
that, we can look at, this is a very difficult environment. Who sort of stood out in Q2? There's a few people out there, myself included, who look at the aggregate and say that this is potentially the trough fundamentally, right? I mean, on the aggregate from a revenue standpoint, it's hard to argue when you've got Maryland, Missouri, Connecticut all ramping. They'll get New York figured out. But there's other states that are coming on. We know Ohio is voting in November.
Yep.
And then we have Florida that's going through Supreme Court challenge, but that would be huge. And then Pennsylvania. So those are three swing states ahead of an election that could really make a difference. But it's really, I think, about getting to a tipping point. And depending on who you ask, and I don't think it's any secret, I was going to say, depending on who you ask, there's going to be wholesale change coming from above, from the federal level. But depending on who you ask, what's the timing? Is it the end of this year, like it's been signaled by some? Will it drag into next year ahead of the election, so more bang for the political buck? I don't know, but I do know that the companies that could figure out, their way to get through this trough, this tunnel, this, if it's Andy Dufresne and that tunnel is shit, like that's where we are. Like it's been 2.5 years of shit, but there is another side to a cycle if you believe in the cyclicality of the world. I just I'm just hoping that the broader market still has a bid when that time comes.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the question, right? Like which ones survive, and I know you work with some, so it's hard to say. But on the other side of things, you talked earlier about the cannabis industry coming together. Yes, we do it at the Benzinga Cannabis Conference, but there's also this Mission Green, Weldon Angelos. Can you give the little story there, the Cliff Note version?
Okay.
Um, and then so let's talk about Mission Green and how you're involved. And
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is an
So I mean,
ultra, yes,
Weldon's a fascinating story. He's a music producer in the '90s. I think it was Snoop and some other a few others from his I guess music circle were traveling to visit Weldon in Utah to cut records. Weldon was a producer. And I guess the Salt Lake City police caught wind, didn't like it, didn't want Utah to get infected. And then so they set up Weldon and had an undercover, not an undercover, I'm sorry, an informant that Weldon knew, somebody he knew, show up and buy, what was it, $300 worth of weed on three separate occasions. And the next thing you know, the SWAT team's busting down his door and they slap on, they try to get him for 110-year mandatory. The charges that were filed was a 50, and he was convicted of a 55-year mandatory minimum sentence. And it was so egregious that the
unbelievable.
judge, it's unbelievable, but the judge, who was appointed by a Republican, I believe, a federal judge, who had to sentence him, stepped off the bench in protest and began advocating. And then others did too, including the Koch family, and Kim Kardashian. Talk about strange bedfellows, and all these other people. And sure enough, he got out. It was through the help of a number of different people, and then he went immediately to start advocating to get the First Step Act passed, which would repeal this mandatory minimum sentencing. And he got it done. Interestingly, the first time he tried to get it done, Mitch McConnell knocked it down. And then his friends in high places got involved, and then it passed. So here we are, all these years later, and we are trying to get behind Weldon to move this country away from the war on drugs, and have to do it incrementally because it's the only path forward. But I've walked the halls with this man in Washington. I've watched the senators and the lawmakers from both sides of the aisle come out and take pictures with him. Dick Durbin called him a legend on the congressional record. And in a world where these politicians don't necessarily respond well to a lot of people in our industry and otherwise, I think he's got the ear of both sides, and with my money and for my money is the best man to move this forward. So we started after we didn't get safe passed in December. It was our space crashed and it was terrible again. And Weldon called me on January 4th and he told me that he had gotten a call from a senator who said, "You guys really need to get your shit together." And so I said to him, "Well, why don't we just, take the program that we initiated with Verano a couple of years ago, which you saw when you were there, Jason, which I believed at the time was a Roundup program. It was a marketing program. But nonetheless, I said, why don't we just take that and roll it out everywhere?" And he said, "Can you do that?" And I said, "What else are we going to do?" And so the last 7 months, we've been going. And by the way, there's no back end system from a point of sale standpoint. That's like an API. You can just plug and play, and it sits across all these networks. Every one of these is different, not just at the operators, but pretty much by the state, by the store. So we had to, after we went around and got all these people say, "Yes, it's a great idea. I'm in. How do we do it?" We were like, "Okay, well, how do we do it?" And nobody had figured out how to actually do it. So we had to go then to all of this, the point of sales guys, service providers. Had some really good, friends help out who were in that space. And here we are. We've got ourselves, a pretty good alliance. Everyone from Glass House, Air Wellness, TerraSend, Forefront, PharmaCann, Verano, and then, good folks like Advanced and AeroPay and Headset Salt. Everybody's been very helpful. As we said to them, we don't want to ask anybody to write a check in this environment, but we have no problem asking consumers of legal cannabis to be the change they hope to see and round up for federal cannabis reform. And that's what we're rolling out to the best of our abilities so that we can arm Weldon with the money he needs to affect this positive change.
Yeah, and Todd has taken a big role in helping to affect this positive change. The program is called Mission Green. Weldon, I think, will be at the Benzinga conference. It's in September 27th and 28th. But Todd has pushed it forward, and he's not charging fees. This is, again, to get the government to do the right thing. Like talking about the 1940s, 50s. Again, my mom, I keep saying the word again. I apologize for that. But my mom, not ever thinking cannabis would be a solution for her. I'm telling you, someone with and by the way, Todd and I know this. We've had Kelvin Johnson on the stage and other football players who the cannabis was their only solution to relieve the pain. And which is crazy to me. And this is where the thing that Todd said many years ago was how pharmaceuticals push back against this stuff. So imagine listening to this show right now. Imagine being in super much, when you're in super pain, like when you're when you have big pain, you have a shoulder pain, elbow pain, tennis elbow. Imagine there's a solution out there. It's a solution. It exists. It comes from the ground, and people aren't letting you have it. Aren't letting you. And that is why I think you hear Todd Harrison, who is, listen, he could go trade stocks and be a hedge fund manager again, but he's so passionate about this industry because he sees the solutions it can provide. Forget yes, can TerraSend, Verano, and all these great companies, Air Wellness, be great? The answer is yes. But he also sees how crazy this industry is right now, that we're not letting people know that these solutions exist in a real way. I mean, is that a good answer, Todd? Because I don't think it's in the space to make money. Yes, you have a business. Yes,
I
CV Capital Management.
Make money. My wife I'm thinking of myself as you say that he's not charging and he's not here to make money. Thank God my wife's not hearing this because.
I guess on your funds,
it's possible to do well by doing good, and I do think we're on the right side of history. And I do think this is an emerging asset class. One of the reasons we focused on public stocks is because we do believe that institutions are going to adopt this as the education manifests, and they understand this is about getting well, not about necessarily just getting high. And that this is we were working with some companies right now that are working on getting minor cannabinoids to employees through their payment plans. Think about, everyone, as we were growing up, Jason, thought that the runner's high was endorphins, but we now know that the runner's high is an endocannabinoid. So there's an endocannabinoid that
I didn't know that.
Yes, that it triggers exactly the same way as THC triggers in your body. And so you're like, holy cow, it is a runner's high. It is an actual high. It's THC. It mimics THC. And so when we talk about our bodies all having this endocannabinoid system and these processes already in our body, and then cannabis cannabinoids helping to supplement that over time, you start to understand that this is very much part of the solution, not just for the indications and for the pain and all of the different conditions you're talking about, but I think it's also a solution to really unwind us from getting stacked on medicines and prescription medicines for for different side effects. I mean, for all of these medicines, there's another medicine for side effect, not an accident, right? They're making a lot of money on this. So I think as this education unfolds, we do think the institutions, when they're able, will be able to step into the space. We know that they were massing in November, but I think a lot of people have just sort of said, hey, produce the corpse and we'll release Sloan at this point. Like, show us that you're actually serious about federal change, and and we'll start, and we're happy to pay up a little bit to get there. And we'll see what happens. We need the government to stay open. That much I know, right? It's not just about safe banking. It's about the HHS. It's about the DOJ. And we think that, it's one of those things that when I went to DC, they said something that stuck with me. They said, the federal government's not designed to move fast. States are designed to be more nimble. The federal government is designed to move slow. But when change happens, it tends to happen all at once. And I was like, okay. So, they actually maintain that over the last decade, the issue of cannabis has made more progress than pretty much any other issue. Wall Street, investors, we don't have the same lens. We don't have the same measuring stick, right? We need things now. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. So, we have like 2 minutes left. There's two things I want to say. One is, Todd has CB1 capital management funds, consulting business. So if you're looking to invest in cannabis, I don't know if he's raising now, but he has funds and he knows these companies intimately well as you hear him talking about this stuff. So reach out if you're on the fund side. You have his Cannabis Confidential Substack newsletter. But other thing I was going to say, Todd, is if they created some sort of cannabinoids that would help with lowering cholesterol or losing weight, I think you would see some other mass adoption, because I have Crestor that I'm supposed to be taking. And if there was a cannabis solution, I'd much rather take that, some
THCV, it's funny you should say that. THCV is a minor cannabinoid. It is quickly gaining adoption. This will get you high, but it's an appetite suppressant.
Oh, so we got our Ozempic competitor?
Yeah, quite possibly, but THCV, I'll tell you, when I was in California, I tried it at the Glass House, had some great new gummies with THCV.
Glass House.
But it's out there. So yes, we just need to do more work and educate people. I think we'll get there, my man.
I'm writing this down. The CBN for the nighttime thing you said to check out, THCV. Okay, and then the other thing Todd was saying was, I was saying like, hey, why isn't there like the ADD? And he said every body is different, every person is different. Just like if you went to a bar, there was different alcohol. Will there be a solution, or are you working on one of like that you like give your DNA swab and then it tells you you're fit for these three things, Todd?
I mean, we're not, but I saw those companies floating around a couple of years ago. I don't think they were there from a technology standpoint yet, but that is definitely already, in motion. Yes.
Okay. That'd be cool. So now, Todd, a couple of questions that are really quick that are cannabis related. What was your worst or your first job? Your worst or your first, or both? In life. Goes back in the day.
My first job was, I think I was 13. I was flipping bagels. My worst job when I was, I think I was 16.
My brother did that.
Oh, that's great. I got fat as fuck though. And the worst job I think I just moved to California. I was 16. And I made $50 a day picking weeds in a field because I needed the money.
Are you serious?
Yeah. But I also look back on it and say, hey, worst case, I could always go back and do that. So
how many days a week? How many days do you do that for before you quit?
It was on the weekends because I was in high school, but I was like, I did it for a few weekends. Hey, you need money. Listen, it's funny, a different generation these days, but I'm a big believer that if you work from a young age, it serves you in good stead. But
Todd, I responded to one of those ads in the newspaper about making $20 an hour. So I go to the job interview. The guy says, you have the job. And what it was carrying a bag of stuff and going and knocking on doors, like nail salons, all this stuff. And they would have no solicitors. And the guy who was training me this day, we'd walk in, they said, we said no solicitors. And he goes, I thought it said no Sicilians or something. And that was the way he sold. It was the most embarrassing thing I've done, but it was interesting. And, it's the hustle and knocking on doors. But okay, so I got worst and first. And then what was like, or either the coolest person you smoked cannabis with, or one of the cooler meetings you had back in the day in your hedge fund days? I mean, I know that you were on the front of everything, and I know your parties that you threw, Minionville days. Like, what were the coolest couple of meetings with people that you had?
There's been a few of those.
Okay,
So let's just say
yeah,
that there have been, I got married at
with the
41, and everything before that has been blacked out and
yeah,
redacted.
well, why I asked that, guys? Any person you see on Wall Street, from the Carl Icahns world to Todd, has been there with them in the same place. I'm trying to just people understand when they see you from a cannabis perspective, Todd. I don't think they realize your past. I don't think they realize how successful you were as a hedge fund manager. I don't think people know that unless they were following you back then. And so I'm just trying to represent. You have someone that's not a Johnny come lately on this space. Like, I'm not trying to do a kiss up here, but it's the funniest thing to me is I bring up this little thing about I said cholesterol, and then I said appetite suppressant. Right away, Todd goes into THCV. Then you talk about the cannabinoids. You're like an encyclopedia of this space. I guess my last question is, how does someone get 10% of the knowledge you have on this space if they really want to understand how the cannabinoid system works, like in the body? Because that part that you talk about, I'm not even 1%. How does someone get 5% of what you know? I guess that's because that's why I keep.
We have a lot of
You go.
stuff on our website, which is a good starter.
What's your website link? Which one?
cb1cap.com.
cb1cap.com. C's and Charlie, B's and Boy 1 cap.com. So that's a good start to go check it out.
Yeah, there's some stuff there, but there's plenty of books. I had just gotten a few books. I don't even know where they are, but there's plenty of literature that's now coming out about the endocannabinoid system. And if you follow the science, it's really fascinating.
Okay.
But I think
All right.
most people right now are if I could be frank, they, at this point, they think that the space is dead and that the industry is over, and there's no place to run. And, you talk about having 34 years of experience on Wall Street. Like, I don't know when, how, or why, but this is the type of environment where, I say this as I watch these games breaking down, but this is the type of environment where, you get a kiss from the gods. There's not going to be anybody left to sell. So it's worth paying attention to. There's a few catalysts on the horizon. Like I said, we need to keep the government open. But if you follow the fundamentals, like the names that we talked about, I think you're going to do okay no matter what happens at the federal level. And then if you get that kiss, then we could maybe have some fun.
Is the kiss from the government? Is that what we need?
Yeah, it has to be.
Change?
Yeah, that's become
Okay.
that's become the phase 3 binary, readout at this point.
All right, we will have Todd on again. Cannabis Confidential, his Substack is awesome. He is, as you hear, an encyclopedia on this industry. And the reason I talk about his hedge fund days so much is because he was the man in the hedge fund space. He was the man building financial media company Minionville from scratch. Like, this is what Todd does, and so that's what I think is so interesting. You don't go in lightly. You go in as deep as anyone. And I said about how you're not just doing this for money or whatever. Mission Green isn't. You're not making money off Mission Green. What you're trying to do is a movement. And so I want to be very clear. Todd's not in this industry just to be like a saint. He wants to make money on it because he believes there's a huge opportunity, but then he also believes in Mission Green and what Weldon's doing because it's the right thing to do. So those two things, doing well by doing good, is a great way to put it. So Todd Harrison, CB1 Capital Management, thank you for being a forerunner, for connecting the space and doing what you do. I don't know how you keep getting into different industries that then become controversial. Then everyone was going to be like, I guarantee a year from now, maybe it's 2 years from now, everyone's like, oh yeah, of course. You didn't take the ADD cabinet, and then we'll go back to this video right now and you could say, I told you so, but that's what's going to happen. So thank you for coming on the Raz Report. We went a little long, but I really appreciate you coming on.
No, I appreciate you. I'll see you in a few weeks, my man.
Yes. Thank you.